And here we go.
Viewer discretion is advised.
Guys, turkey's ready. Yeah! Mom's apple tea. Let us pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this food. Thank you for this time with family. I'm grateful for all of our blessings. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Why did you eat before saying grace? Here, let me help you wash that down. Have some mashed potatoes and some gravy. Now talk!
Chicago Bears John Rivetto. Dare I bring up the double doink? Well, I guess I just did. Cody Parkey was a 77% kicker. Not great, but not a disaster either. His percentage would have been way higher if uprights didn't get in the way. He was way better than John Rivetto, who lasted just 2 awful seasons in the Windy City despite making just 45% of his attempts in 1981 and 1982. Chicago Bears, Aaron Rodgers. This clip says it all. What makes it even worse is he's right.
The score.
24-5 all-time against the Bears. I don't really need to say much else.
Aaron Rodgers.
Chicago Bears. The Bears traded a high second-round pick for one promising wide receiver, Chase Claypool, who gave no effort in the blocking game and had close to no production in the passing game before getting his walking papers. They should have done their homework on a guy who wasted seconds off the clock celebrating a first down. Shout out to Chris Conte, one of the most hated safeties by his own fan base to ever live. Ryan Pace. Chicago Bears. Bears fans and most everyone else will remember Ryan Pace as the guy who traded up for Mitch Trubisky, but he should also be remembered for a slew of other shitty moves too. Of course, I can remind you that Pace passed on both Groper Cleveland and Patrick Mahomes in that draft, but Pace also gave up the 3rd, 67th, and 111 picks in the 2017 draft, and a 3rd the next year to the Niners for kissin' titties, in one of the most unnecessary and lopsided trades of all time. Pace looked like a semi-genius right up until the double doink, and then things started to fall apart. Yes, he did hit on the Khalil Mack trade in 2018, but throughout his 7-year tenure as the Bears GM, he was clearly a horrible evaluator of talent at the game's most important position. Pace released Jay Cutler to make room for Mike Glennon. He carted out Chase Daniel, Nick Foles, and a washed-up Andy Dalton. Then, history repeated itself when he traded up for Justin Fields in 2021, though the jury is still out on that one. Pace was also weak when it came to free agents. Doing things like giving Jimmy Graham money generally looks bad. But perhaps his biggest failure was not addressing the O-line until it was entirely too late. In 6 drafts prior to 2021, he only drafted 1 tackle. Unfortunately, Tevin Jenkins has been hurt often, and he overspent in the middle on free agents like Charles Leno and Bobby Massey to get mixed results. Most Bears fans will tell you it wouldn't have mattered if Pace drafted Watson or Mahomes. The Bears were gonna ruin either of them in the same horrific way. Just look at Justin Fields right now. Pace, who was the youngest GM in NFL history at the time he was hired, was fired in 2022, and despite 2 trips to the playoffs, the team was 48-65 under his tenure. Chicago Bears, Virginia Hollis McCaskey. Ask any Bears fan who is to blame for the team's ineptness since the days of the Super Bowl shuffle, and one name is gonna come up. Virginia Hollis McCaskey. During her long, stubborn 41-year reign, she's been pretty much rightly blamed for the team's lack of direction and general mismanagement. She let her kids run wild like George Jr., hiring a coach without telling him and then ultimately backing out of that to really not having a clue as to what is going on. Like, there's no way someone actually told her Rex Grossman was starting in the Super Bowl, or that Ryan Pace was really the GM. Look, she's 100, and Ed, her husband, is 101. Even when she passes, son George McCaskey gets the team, and he'll probably live to be 120. Sorry, Bears fan. Chicago Bears, what's the theme here? Don't trade up for a QB, especially if he likes kissing titties. In 2017, the Bears were desperate for a QB, so desperate, in fact, they needed to give away draft capital for Mitch Trubisky, moving up just one slot with the 49ers team that already traded for Jimmy G. The Bears sent the 3rd overall, 2 third-rounders, and a 4th to the Niners for Trubisky in a move more unnecessary than commenting on a Cornhub video. Trubisky did win a playoff game behind a stout defense, but then once he had to play football, the Bears figured out that he sucked. The Niners turned the picks into defensive lineman Solomon Thomas, wide receiver Dante Pettis, and the absolute beast of a linebacker Fred freaking Warner. And let's never forget, Groper Cleveland and Patrick Mahomes were in the same draft and were taken much later. 2012 Chicago Bears. The 2012 Bears started the season with aspirations of improving on their previous 8-8 record from the year earlier and at least returning to the NFC Championship, which they backed into in 2010. To do this, they enlisted the services of wide receiver Brandon Marshall from the Miami Dolphins, who had played alongside Bears quarterback Jay Cutler during their time with the Broncos. Midway through the season, the Bears were near juggernauts, amassing a remarkable 7-1 record in the initial 8 games, as good as they'd been since their 2006 Super Bowl run. They boasted a league-leading scoring differential of +120. Their defense was ranked 2nd with only 15 points per game allowed, and etched its name in the record books by recording 6 interceptions returned for tutties in the first 7 games, setting an NFL record. Then things came crashing down for the Bears as they struggled to a 3-5 record in the remaining 8 games. They fell to the Texans and got lit up by Colin Kaepernick a week later on Monday Night Football. And despite notching a 10-6 record and beating the Detroit Lions in the season finale, the Vikings got the 2nd wildcard spot with the tiebreaker, and Chicago became the first team since the 1996 Washington Redskins to start the season 7-1 and miss the playoffs. Even worse than missing out on the postseason, Chicago fired Lovie Smith, which seemed iffy, but they replaced him with Mark Trestman, who was a head coach for the Montreal Alouettes. Further proof that no one associated with Canada or the name Canada should be coaching in the NFL. Super Bowl 41, Colts versus Bears in 2007. Most of you remember Super Bowl 41 as the worst weather Super Bowl in the history of the game, as a monsoon covered the stadium in torrential downpour. But not many people remember the Bears being ahead and blowing an 8-point second quarter lead. After Mushin Muhammad scored a TD to put the Bears up 14-6 in the first quarter, it looked like things might actually go the Bears' way. But a field goal with 11:17 left in the second quarter and a Dominic Rhodes TD 5 minutes later put the Colts up 16-14. And unlike Lot's wife, that's a Bible reference, everyone, they never looked back. The Bears did pull within 5 in the second half, but a pick 6 with 11:44 left in the game sealed the 29-17 victory for Peyton Manning and the Colts. Chicago Bears, Mark Hatley. I know I said Ryan Pace was an awful GM, but that was before I discovered Mark Hatley. Hatley somehow seized the job in 1997 when the Bears were reeling and consequently made some awful moves. He drafted Curtis Enis in the first round out of Penn State, who tore his ACL 9 games into his rookie year and never was the same. Hatley overpaid for cornerback Thomas Smith, who was burnt toast. In 1999, he traded down and passed on Dante Culpepper to take Cade McNown. That didn't work. McNown was traded after a year. Hatley did make some good moves like drafting Brian Urlacher, but the results were not there on the field. 19-45 in his 4-year tenure. Chicago Bears. One of the NFL's founding fathers and legendary owner George Halas had a knack for gaining a competitive advantage back in the day by cutting holes in the opposition's towels and putting itching powder in their soap, like a scene from Revenge of the Nerds.
You can do it! You can do it! You gotta believe that you can do it!
He also had a trained dog run out onto the field to get an extra timeout, a la Jason Kidd spilling a drink. In the Bears' long history, there have been very few scandals other than the rampant nepotism that is holding the team back. Chicago Bears, 17 starting quarterbacks. Jay Cutler's arrival upon a blockbuster trade with Denver in 2009 was supposed to be the solution to the Bears' quarterback woes that had stretched decades. While Cutler brought moments of brilliance, he also delivered a league-high 26 interceptions in his first season. Despite leading the Bears to the NFC Championship game in 2010, Cutler's tenure was riddled with injuries and inconsistent play, and of course, not caring. He did somehow last 9 seasons in Chicago. After Cutler, the Bears hoped to find their quarterback in the future in the form of Mitchell Trubisky, drafted 2nd overall in 2017. Trubisky showed flashes of potential on a stacked defensive team, including a Pro Bowl season in 2018, but ultimately failed to establish himself as a reliable starter. The decision to draft Trubisky over Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson became a punchline, but then again, the only allegation against Trubisky is that he likes to kiss them titties, and that allegation was made by Mitchell Trubisky himself. The Bears continued to cycle through quarterbacks: Mike Lennon, Nick Foles, and Andy Dalton, all of them washed up like dead fish in Lake Michigan. Foles was acquired in 2020 and started 7 games, but was benched in favor of Trubisky. Andy Dalton was brought in for the 2021 season and was named the starter, but soon lost the job to Ohio State phenom Justin Fields. Fields was and is an otherworldly talent, or maybe just a remarkable athlete, who showed he had the physical traits necessary to excel at quarterback without the ability to do so for multiple games in a row. At the end of his run, and he did run a lot, the Bears were rewarded with a #1 pick in 2024 and are hoping that Caleb Williams will become the best quarterback in team history. He better, because it's not a very high bar to clear. New Soldier Field was reconstructed in 2003, and the team and the city have been in a protracted fight over its replacement for a while, but the plan is to have a new one open by 2028, with New Soldier Field only serving a 25-year lifespan, even though it was pretty much obsolete and hated the moment it was built. Chicago Bears 2022. The Bears' low point in recent history came in 2022 when they suffered an embarrassing 41-10 loss to the Detroit Lions in Week 17. Justin Fields struggled to move the offense, and the Bears' defense was thoroughly outclassed. Fields would be traded in the offseason. However, the Bears would garner draft capital from their own futility, as well as gifts from the Panthers, and their rapid turnaround seems underway. Chicago Bears. The Bears have had some devastating on-field losses, like when Jay Cutler got booed for not coming back into a game, but losing Jim McMahon in 1986 to a cheap shot by Charles Martin robbed the Bears of a potential return trip to the Super Bowl, and McMahon was never really the same again after that. The Bears finished their title defense season 14-2, but ultimately had to start Doug Flutie against the Redacteds in the playoffs and lost 27-13, which should have been a dynasty, ended up flaming out. Chicago Bears 1997. The Bears entered 1997 with optimism, only to fall to a dismal 4-12 record. Oh yeah, I had to bring up one of those depressing Dave Wannstedt years. Injuries ravaged the team, particularly on defense. The quarterback situation was a mess, starting both Eric Kramer and Rick Meyer, a choice which is like voting in America. Wannstedt's popularity plummeted, he wasn't fired, and they went 4-12 again. Mark Trestman, Chicago Bears. Things might be confusing now in America with Matt Eberflus finding amazing ways to lose game, but no period was more bizarre than from 2013 to 2014, when the Bears thought it was wise to poach a head coach from another country. Mark Trestman did have extensive NFL experience as an OC and QB coach for multiple teams like the Bucks, Browns, 49ers, Cardinals, and Raiders. But prior to being named the head man for the Bears, he was the head coach for the Montreal Alouettes in the CFL. In case you're wondering, an Alouette is a bird. If you have ever watched the CFL, it looks like American football, but it is not American football. Wideouts get head starts on routes, and the players apologize to each other after big hits. So Trestman was hired after Lovie Smith went 10-6 in one of the dumbest firings and then subsequent hirings I've ever seen. Trestman went 8-8 his first year and then 5-11, but with the Canadian exchange rate, that's probably 9-7 and 6-10 or something. Trestman isn't Canadian, by the way. He's from Minnesota. He was then fired and replaced by John Fox. Trestman would return to the CFL to coach in 2017 for the Toronto Argonauts, the XFL in 2020 for the Tampa Bay Vipers, and is now a consultant for the Los Angeles Chargers. He also had a brief stint as the Ravens OC in 2015. I mean, the dude probably knows football. Just him being brought in from Canada made no sense, like importing ketchup chips.
Chicago Bears. You're probably expecting me to say that this is offensive to people who have suffered from bear attacks or known loved ones or lost loved ones from bear attacks, and while that is true, I'm going to go a different route. Chicago Bears are subliminally supporting cardiovascular and heart disease. Because you want to know what the mascot for Coca-Cola, one of the leading soft drinks in the world, is? Polar bears. Get it? They're trying to tell our children that drinking and consuming large amounts of sugar is okay. And guess what happens? Those children end up becoming obese and fat, and they die young from heart troubles and obesity. So shame on the Chicago Bears for promoting obesity.
Chicago Bears, Kevin White. It tells you how bad of a bust White was that Justin Fields isn't the pick here. White was selected 7th overall in 2015 out of West Virginia, and the story of his career was injuries. The guy missed his entire rookie season in 2015 due to injuries, and all in all, he caught just 25 passes for 285 yards and never scored a touchdown for the Bears. He's not only one of the worst picks of the last 10 years, he's one of the worst draft busts ever. And again, it might not be fair because of his health, but staying on the field and availability is a big part of being able to produce, and poor Kevin White just couldn't stay healthy. He made Bob Sanders look like Cal Ripken Jr.
Chicago Bears, Matt Eberflus. This is an interesting one because the Justin Fields era is over, and I thought that Eberflus would be gone with Justin Fields, but apparently they want to keep Eberflus for their new guy, Caleb Williams, and so I feel like that might give him a little bit longer of a rope, but still, 10-24 through 2 years, and for as good as Caleb Williams might be, he's still going to be a rookie quarterback, so there's still a lot of flaws the Bears have, so I wouldn't expect anything other than another losing season. So I think they might give him another year or two, but I think his seat, I think it's a 3.5 out of 5. I think it's pretty warm.
Chicago Bears, Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams is an ultra-talented rookie, unbelievably fun to watch. He has the potential to be a top 2 or 3 quarterback if he stays healthy for many years to come, just something that I never thought I would say about somebody who is employed by the Chicago Bears. If he stays healthy and reaches his potential, he could end up as a top 10 quarterback of all time. Obviously, a little bit down the road, but I stand by that. As far as first overall picks are concerned, he steps into a pretty good situation around him offensively. They got Keenan Allen. They drafted guys for him. So it's not like the cup is bare the way you see for a lot of other first overall picks. My only on-field concern when I watch him play is that he will hold the ball too long sometimes to make the highlight play, which is a trait of other guys like Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson. And Rodgers is a guy who I think Williams most plays like. And that was also Rodgers' biggest weakness throughout his career, taking sacks, things like that. That's one thing that he will have to clean up in the NFL, and really, in my opinion, will be what decides whether or not he does reach his potential. His prove it rating, just based by default because he's a rookie, is at a 10 out of 10.
Then we move on to the Chicago Bears and Kevin Byard III. Now, I can just say this isn't me being butthurt as an Eagles fan. When we traded for him last year, midway through the year, I thought, okay, finally we'll have some help defensively, and he ended up being terrible. I don't know what that's going to go down as one of the worst trades, I feel like, of all time, because we got him for half a year and then he goes to the Bears, but he still has the big name. A lot of these guys, that's the whole point of this list, is a lot of these players that I'm listing have big names. They're still big names, but the production isn't there. And Kevin Byard's one of those guys, you look at his numbers and coverage, you know, he was not very good at all last season. Quarterbacks had passer rating over 102 against him, completed almost 75% of their passes targeted at him. Yeah, that's not going to get it. Chicago Bears, Zeke Bratkowski, 1960. Believe me, there was a lot of shit to sort through in the history of terrible Chicago Bears seasons, but I had to pick one of them, and this one was Zeke Bratkowski, who was registered as only starting one game that season, but I made an exception for it because he still threw 175 passes, which back in the 60s was a pretty good amount for a season. Anyway, he completed just under half of his passes. He threw 6 touchdowns to 21 interceptions. He had a 40.4 passer rating, and this was just when the Bears, Sid Luckman was still relatively recently retired, so the Bears hadn't established themselves yet as a team that will never have any good quarterbacks for the rest of their franchise, except maybe Caleb Williams now. But, I mean, you can see here he had a 7 interception game as well. He had a no touchdown, 5 interception game. He had a game with a 0 passer rating. Just disgusting. And his name was Zeke Bratkowski. What kind of name is that shit? NFL just announced their 2024 Hall of Fame inductees, and Devin Hester was among them, and I had to make a video about this. And I want to state for the record that I have nothing personal against Devin Hester. I enjoyed watching him play. He was an exciting player, but he might be the single worst Hall of Fame selection, not just in the history of the NFL, but in sports history among players who were solely selected for their playing career. The biggest argument among Hester supporters for him making the Hall of Fame is that he's the best returner of all time. And that's only half true. He's the best punt returner of all time, but is he the best kickoff returner of all time? No. And there's quantifiable data to prove it. In fact, you could argue that he's not even a top 5 kickoff returner of all time. But again, returning kicks is not all about just touchdowns, even though that's pretty important. It's about impact. It's about field position, right? So surely Devin Hester must have had an incredible winning percentage and won a bunch of Super Bowl rings in his career, right? Well, actually, no. He played in 156 career regular season games, and in those games, his teams had a middling 55.8% win-loss percentage. Not terrible, but not some sort of super Hall of Fame impact. But surely he at least won one Super Bowl ring, right? Well, no, actually, he never won a Super Bowl ring. He did make a Super Bowl appearance in his rookie year, the only Super Bowl appearance of his career. And hey, he even returned a touchdown in the Super Bowl. I mean, that's surely Hall of Fame worthy, right? To return the opening kickoff of the Super Bowl for a touchdown. Wow, what an incredible scene. Hall of Fame worthy. Except 9 other players have returned a kickoff for a touchdown in the Super Bowl. And how many of them do you see being argued for the Hall of Fame? When's Percy Harvin's induction? Desmond Howard actually won Super Bowl MVP in Super Bowl 31. He's not in the Hall of Fame. Jacoby Jones had a 108-yard kickoff return in Super Bowl 47 and comparable career receiving stats to Devin Hester, and he's not anywhere near the Hall of Fame. All in all, Devin Hester had 20 career return touchdowns, which is the all-time record. 20 touchdowns. As far as I know, special teams touchdowns aren't worth any more points than receiving touchdowns, rushing touchdowns, or any other type of return touchdowns, defensive, what have you. So this obsession with Hester being quote-unquote the best return man ever, be able to get him into Canton, I don't understand it. So let's look at what happened when Hester tried to be an every down player. He finished his career tied for 600th all-time in receptions with 255. He finished 551st all-time in receiving yards, tied for 735th in touchdown catches, right with Darius Hayward-Bay. Once you include his return touchdowns, he moves all the way up to being tied for 510 all-time in total touchdowns. Simply put, there are literally hundreds of players that I would have chosen before I would even think about putting Hester into the Hall of Fame. To really drive the point home, let's compare Hester's career receiving stats to some other receivers and tight ends who are currently eligible for the Hall of Fame, but not in the Hall of Fame. This is fucking disgusting. All because of what? A couple return touchdowns? Reggie Wayne won a Super Bowl. Torrey Holt won a Super Bowl. Hines Ward won 2 Super Bowls. So this entire impact shit that you have for Hester is complete and total nonsense. And you got other guys, Sterling Sharp, Henry Ellard. There's a boatload of receivers that were leaps and bounds better than Devin Hester and had more of an impact than Devin Hester that will never sniff the Hall of Fame or have yet to get into the Hall of Fame. And for some reason that bugs me. My simple argument is this. You can say he's the best returner of all time, but the best returner of all time to me still isn't more worthy of a Hall of Fame induction than the 100th best receiver of all time or the 200th best receiver of all time or even the 300th best receiver of all time. Simply put, if you're not good enough to be an effective every down player, you don't belong in the Hall of Fame. How can you be good enough for the Hall of Fame if you're not even good enough to play every down for your team? And this is the same exact argument for Steve Tasker of the Buffalo Bills. I have no idea how this happened. I know that people have a lot of nostalgia with Hester and his return touchdowns, but my goodness, people, how do we let this happen? This is an absolute travesty, and everybody involved should be ashamed.
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
Football has been played on the same ground the Chicago Bears have called home for over 100 years. Though the building they play in now is technically only a little over 20 years old, it's never been the right fit, and it's time to find a new one. You would think that would be easy. However, if you know the Bears and how things work in the city of Chicago, it's predictably become a farce of epic proportions. Let's look at the incredibly dumb Bears Stadium saga. Original Soldier Field. Before we get into the beef, let's understand the interesting story of where the Bears came from. The original Soldier Field was built back in 1922 for a cost of $13 million, equivalent to about $240 million today, by the city of Chicago, who were the owners/operators of the property. Originally known as Municipal Grant Park Stadium, the name was changed to Soldier Field 3 years later in 1925 in honor of the U.S. soldiers who died during World War I. Some say the sequel was much better. The stadium's design is a neoclassical style and fit over 100,000 people in the early days because back then they didn't have corn or the internet. Ready for a surprise? The Bears weren't even the first pro football team to play in Soldier Field. The Chicago Cardinals played their final season in Soldier Field in 1959, over 10 years before the Bears would move in 1971, coming over from Wrigley Field. Yes, Soldier Field was 49 years old before the Bears even moved in. I guess there's hope for me after all. Even back then, the Bears originally planned to build and own a stadium in Arlington Heights, but the property didn't fit the league's specifications. Oh, the irony. First replacement talks. As the already aging stadium got older, just like your mom, in 1989, one of the funniest named stadium proposals of all time came to be. It was called the McDome after Bears president Michael McCaskey, but was turned down by the Illinois state legislature. Mostly because of the dumb name. Then in 1995, an outside firm proposed a 75,000 seat stadium in Gary, Indiana. I don't even want to think of that as a real thing. That one got rejected by the Lake County Council pretty quickly because, well, it was in Gary, Indiana. The spaceship lands. Finally, in 2002, it was decided the team needed a new stadium to call home. So rather than do the normal thing and build a new stadium, the stadium's interior would be demolished while the exterior would be preserved. The Bears had to play at Memorial Stadium at the University of Illinois for a year, while new Soldier Field was being renovated. Bet you didn't remember that. The new and improved Soldier Field cost over $630 million to complete, with the taxpayers footing $430 million of that bill, while the Bears and the NFL put up only $200 million. However, the Chicago Park District, aka the City of Chicago, would own and operate the stadium, which was met with instant criticism. Some new nicknames for the stadium were the eyesore on the lakeshore, the monstrosity on the midway, and even the mistake by the lake, which was just stolen from the Browns and Old Municipal Stadium. Trust me, don't ever steal anything from Cleveland.
Though at least we're not Detroit!
Despite the renovation, the stadium lost its designation as a National Historic Landmark. Yep, they kept the outside and still lost the designation. Tragic. Seriously though, I don't think it means much of anything. And so for over 20 years, the Bears lived uncomfortably in New Soldier Field like every single Bears QB in the pocket since. And that leads us to today. The drama. In the summer of 2021, the Bears submitted a bid for the Arlington Park racetrack property, a spacious flat plot of undeveloped land. Well, it had a racetrack on it. That's 1 hour away from Soldier Field. Just a couple of months later, the Bears and Churchill Downs reached an agreement for the property. Done deal, right?
Idiot.
Things got interesting once the Bears announced the Arlington Park or Arlington Heights proposal. The city started making things a little tough on the Bears by wooing them with competitive offers. And their new neighborhood started making things difficult on them too. Typical Chicagoland red tape. Despite announcing that the deal was done, it was far from it. So in January of 2023, the Bears realized they needed a little more muscle to help secure the stadium deal. So they hired a new president, former Big Ten Commissioner Kevin Warren. He had a strong reputation for bringing new stadiums to teams, helping the Vikings secure their new, largely publicly funded stadium. And soon he helped the Bears close the $190 million deal to buy the Arlington Heights property. Then they hired the Manica architecture firm to draw up plans for the new stadium. But issues began to pop up with the Arlington Heights purchase because, of course, they did. While the team hoped to build a state-of-the-art complex on the 326-acre property, local school districts got involved. They wanted the Bears to pay high property taxes. Yeah, the point of the Bears moving away from the city was so they could keep all the money for themselves, not to give it to some school teacher. Kevin Warren and the Bears weren't gonna let some nerd push them around, so they backed out of the stadium deal but still owned the land. Now they had to lower the value of the Arlington Heights land to avoid larger tax bills because the McCaskies are so poor, you know. The Cook County assessor values the land at $197 million, or the amount the Bears paid for it. Makes sense. But the Bears disagreed and began literally destroying the racetrack on the land to alleviate their tax bill. Yeah, don't ever come for a rich person's money. What about the city? Were they going to take this move lying down? Remember Mayor Beetlejuice? Well, one thing she did was try and get the Bears to stay in the city, talking with George McCaskey in person about the matter, even trying to make the current Soldier Field a dome. At the time, the Bears had already announced the Arlington Heights project, so the city seemed desperate in throwing out any proposals they could to get the Bears not to leave for that slut Jolene in Arlington Heights. But because of red tape, those last-ditch efforts don't sound that crazy, and it was recently reported that the Arlington Heights project isn't a singular focus for the club. Now, Warren, the McCaskey family, and the Bears had a new dream: a $3.2 billion stadium right next to the current Soldier Field. This new plan has already run into issues. The governor of Illinois has made it clear that the Bears can't expect any public money for the new stadium. An interesting 180 from the plans put forth by the city early in the process. He says the state needs to focus on food and housing issues. Food and housing more important than football? That's just insane. The idea was a replacement stadium just south of Soldier Field in a place called Burham Park. It would be a massive build with 14 acres of athletic fields and recreational park space. It was built as a place where Super Bowls, Big Ten championships, and other high-profile games could be played. According to a Bears spokesperson, the lakefront site remains the team's focus. But is that really true? What really is next? Who knows? The Bears could turn back to Arlington Heights and deal with the school tax issues. Mind you, they already own the property. They could sack up and build the new stadium next to Soldier Field by themselves. Maybe the Burham Park proposal is just a red herring to get the Arlington Heights teachers to back down from their demands. Or they could just keep kicking the can down the road until new Soldier Field collapses. Yeah, that is the most likely scenario here. Either way, the Bears Stadium saga is a testament to how red tape, greed, and modern government all fight over sports teams and the money involved. The undercapitalized McCaskies can't just do what they want like Stan Kroenke did by throwing money around. The saga is far from over. Until then, grab your popcorn. It's probably gonna get much, much dumber.